but if you want to join our future meetings, they'll be in the Cardi B. I'll have a slide on that later, but yeah. Yeah, welcome. And I will start. Yeah, please proceed. Okay. Just for anyone who's new, this is SCB Florida chapter. Our mission is to promote the dissemination of conservation science, especially the research being done at UF. And we've also had outside speakers as well. We have biweekly GBMs with researchers, conservationists, grad students, and other professionals. And then we also have volunteer and social events. And then this is just, if you missed our first meeting with more information about what we do, there is a recording link that can be sent in the chat as well. So look forward to that. And then I just wanted to briefly introduce our officers in person. So I'm Michelle, I'm the president.
I'm Vanessa, I'm back here. I'm the vice president. Thanks, Michelle.
Should we do?
Yes, just do it.
All
I'm
right.
here too. Our treasurer, Amanda Bishop, is online. Our co-event coordinator, Amanda O'Brien, is also online right now. So if you guys have questions, you can always message the chat. I'm Grace Stoll. I'm the secretary.
This one, right?
Maybe I did turn it off. I think I turned it off.
It's fun. We're still getting used to this one.
Hi, I'm Caro Boyle. I'm the outreach coordinator. Hi, I'm Lexi and I'm the historian.
Awesome. Okay, so if you haven't joined already, we have our Facebook link and our Instagram link, and our GroupMe is in the QR code format. And then just to recap our point system, we have 3 categories: GBMs, events, bonus, and then volunteering falls into the event category, and then members need 3 GBM and 2 event points. And then we have other bonus opportunities for points, like fundraising, etc. So we'll let you know if we have those opportunities coming up. Yeah, and the main thing going on right now is that we have funding for the international SCB. So just to make things clear, we don't have to pay dues to be a part of the Florida chapter here, but we do have funding to provide students access to the global SCB through their membership program. So we have a form that you can fill out, and then we'll contact you with information on how to register, and then we will be able to reimburse you through Venmo or Zelle. And then the next slide just has more of the perks, which include just being in the network and having access to their newsletter, and then some other monetary award opportunities, and you can put on your resume that you are active in SCB. So fill out the form, and then Amanda Bishop will contact you about that. So yes. And then for people who have filled out our hoodie form, we are working on that right now. It's just an update. They should be done like in the next month. So, and then we'll distribute them on a future GBM. So look forward to that. And then our upcoming events are the Luby volunteering. Yeah, so.
Haley.
Hi, I'm Kaylee. If you don't know me, I'm the event coordinator. Most of you probably do already because I often harass the GroupMe. So what we have coming up is, we do have a lot coming up, but a lot of it is kind of rocky right now. The most solid thing that we have for, if you're part of our Ruby GroupMe, we have our first scheduled volunteering event coming up this Saturday, the 25th. And for people who are in the chat, I sent out a poll. If you could just let me know if you finalized your decision to, sorry, I'm loud. if you can just let me know if you finalize your decision to like participate with us, that would be great. And then I can send out more information about the time for Saturday. We're also going to be having hiking socials in the future. We're going to be having a Halloween social. Stay tuned for that. And we're working on planning fundraisers. So yeah, that's all I got.
Yeah. And our next GBM will be 2 weeks from now in a different room. It'll probably be G086. So we look forward to seeing you there if you are coming in person. And then here's just a list of future speakers to look forward to in our upcoming meetings. Yes. But our current speaker at our GBM right now is Dr. Vanessa Hull. She is a wildlife ecology and conservation professor and the leader of the Global Human Wildlife Interactions Lab. So take it away, Dr. Hull.
Great. Thanks so much. Thanks for having me. Yeah, it's exciting. Can people hear me okay? Yeah, okay, good. Cool. Yeah, so it's awesome that you have this club. Yeah, it's exciting to see all the events and things that you're planning, and it's great that you'll be able to do some social things this semester, which I think everyone's definitely craving. So that's awesome. Cool. So let me present from the beginning here. Okay. Screen. Give me 1 second. For some reason, I'm not seeing. Oh, there we go. Okay. I'm going to share my screen. And then, there we go. Cool. Pin myself. There we go. Okay. Cool. So I'll try to keep an eye on the chat, and you can feel free to chime in anytime if you have questions or comments or anything. This is really informal, so yeah, feel free to jump in anytime. So yeah, I'm an assistant professor here at UF and WEC, and I've been here for maybe almost 5 years. Goes by fast, but so I teach 2 classes in WEC. One of them is conservation biology, which is happening now every fall, and then the other one I teach is every other spring, and it's on large mammals, so large mammal ecology and management. So if you're interested in large mammals, that one is coming up this spring coming up. So if you're interested, feel free to come and join us there in the spring. So yeah, we meet Tuesday, Thursday mornings somewhere. I don't actually know which room yet, but stay tuned for next semester. So yeah, I do research on the giant panda. It's been primarily what my research has been about. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about that today. And yeah, answer any questions or anything that might come up. So let me see. There we go. Oh, okay. So this is just a little bit about me. I like to just share with all the students that definitely, you know, like, how do you do panda research? Like, how did that come about? That's really random. It's just true. But yeah, so it came about for me because I was very young. I was like 6 years old, and I was very fascinated by this species. And I got a panda stuffed animal for my birthday and was very enamored with it. And so as I got older and older, I got more and more interested in reading about it and reading about the science and behavior of pandas and the conservation. And so yeah, so when I went away to college, I majored in animal behavior, and my minor was Chinese language. So it was fun, a nice way to kind of set up what was coming after that. So then I went to graduate school at Michigan State University, and my advisor did research on giant pandas over in a reserve over in China. So that's how I got into that. And so yeah, I did a master's and PhD in that same lab, and spent many summers going over to China and doing hiking around and doing all kinds of stuff. So it was really fun project. So yeah, I just encourage you students, like, if there's something you're really passionate about, a particular species, a particular question or system that you've always been passionate about, definitely yeah, see it through and see what happens, because it could be really exciting. So, so yeah, there's a picture of me in the field somewhere with a lot of bamboo, pretty typical for panda habitat. So yeah, here's some more random pictures of me, different times. This was when I was a graduate student. Yeah, it's a beautiful landscape, beautiful mountains, and tons of bamboo. And yeah, I had different hair at different points in the process. There was one point where we had no electricity for like a long time, so I shaved my head a couple times just for convenience, pretty much, and it was good. It was highly recommend, although not in the winter. Turns out very cold. Can be cold if you don't have hair. Actually, I did not realize that until after. So, but otherwise, yeah, it was really fun. So yeah, so when I started this work and when I first went over there, I had this expectation of kind of what my graduate studies would be like or what my experience would be like. It's a little expectation versus reality. I kind of expected that I would be up there in the mountains and measuring a bunch of bamboo and learning about the species and yeah, just collecting data on panda poop and which bamboo they're eating and all these things. And I did do a lot of that. I spent a lot of time doing that. So that is true. But actually, more of my time was kind of spent in this way, where I spent a lot of time getting to know people living in panda habitat. So in panda habitat, there's 68 to 70 nature reserves, and thousands of people live inside the nature reserve in China. They don't kick out the people. So they're, yeah, in our nature reserve, like almost 5,000 people were living there. And there's all these local farmers who are living their lives. And so I was really getting to know these people and like what are their daily life like? What are their needs? What are their livelihood needs? Because most of the people living in panda habitat are poor. They're like below the poverty line or close to it. And so it's this really complex conservation question that doesn't always get talked about like in the popular media where, okay, what do you do with all these people that are trying to make a living in this endangered species habitat? It's really complicated. Um, yeah, okay, just making sure there's no questions. Cool. All right. So yeah, these are just some pictures of my friends and stuff. So yeah, I got to know the people really well. They invited me to their holidays and their family parties and things like that. So it was a really rewarding part of the experience. Here's some more pictures. Me wearing the same field clothes like pretty consistently. But yeah, I mean, a lot of parties and a lot of learning about the culture, really, and kind of this region of the world. And this is really what made the experience really amazing for me. So I definitely appreciate all of these amazing relationships that I established. Um, so yeah, to get back to the panda and what their habitat is and kind of how it's situated. So currently pandas are considered vulnerable. They used to be considered endangered. They got downlisted relatively recently, the last couple of years. And it's kind of controversial. Most of the panda researchers disagree with the downlisting. It's a little controversy, but as you can see here in the map, I mean, the reason that they're in the position that they're in now is because of loss of habitat. It's really true for so many other species that we study. But you can see it really pronounced with pandas, especially. So the light green is where we think they used to be distributed in prehistoric times based on where we find panda fossils. And then as you can see in the 18th century, it shrunk considerably. And then today it's these tiny little dots on the map. So we've really lost quite a lot of panda habitat over the last couple hundred years. It's pretty shocking. And so this is what they're working with. This is why there's so few pandas left. So right now, we think there's about 1,800, I would say, giant pandas left in the wild. Their habitat has shrunk by a factor of 10 at least. And yeah, I mean, as you can see in the picture, it's really fragmented, which anyone who's taking conservation genetics, that should be like some alarm bells going off there of just thinking about what this means for conservation of the species when you have all these isolated little patches. It's definitely a concern. And in between all these little patches, you see, I mean, there's villages, there's cities, there's highways, there's deforestation, all of these things. So yeah, I mean, the main driver for all of this is human population. The population in China has just skyrocketed over the last 100 years or so. And there's got to be space and resources to take care of all of these people and their needs. So that's really kind of what's happened. And yeah, I mean, interestingly from this map, you see the little dot that says Qinling Mountains kind of on the right side. That's actually a subpopulation of giant pandas. They're considered genetically distinct from this other group. And it makes sense from looking at the map, the distance between that little patch is so huge. Like there's no way pandas can go across that distance. There's like, that's several hundred kilometers, I think. So yeah, I mean, it just gives you a sense of the current situation that the species is in. So just a little bit more about the species. So they're pretty well known, I think, in the conservation world as being kind of this charismatic flagship species for conservation, both internationally and within China. So they're considered a national treasure in China. So there's a lot of protection measures that are put in place, and the government honestly puts millions of dollars into conserving them. And so that's actually one of the reasons why they had this downgrading from endangered to vulnerable, because their numbers have kind of stabilized as far as we know, despite the fact that their habitat is not increasing. Their numbers have kind of reached a steady state, kind of where because of all of the protection and investment in things like protected areas. And so that's really been a success, I think, on some scale. So people ask all the time, like, so why do they have black and white? Why are they have this really unique coloration in their face, especially? And biologically, we don't really know. And there's been a lot of different investigations and discussions about what could it be. And the working assumption that we have now, the most likely assumption is that it really helps with communication in the wild, especially against a snowy background. The mountains they live in are very snowy and cold, so they really stand out visually, and it helps them communicate with each other because you get a message very quickly if there's a panda that's trying to show aggressive intent to another panda. You can see their eyes stand out, and then if they lower their head down, their ears really stick out against the white. And so that's kind of one hypothesis, the one that we're working with now. So it's interesting to think about, but it is really important that they communicate with each other effectively. As I'll share in a little bit, they have a very tight energy budget. So they eat bamboo, but their digestive system is not really adapted for that. So they're only digesting like less than 20% of what they're eating. So they're constantly eating and constantly pooping and constantly trying to get energy to survive. So they don't have all this extra energy laying around for things like fighting, and they need to be able to communicate really quickly and really effectively with each other, in other words. So, okay, just making sure. Let's see. So there's a lot of other biodiversity in this region that I just want to point out because it doesn't usually get as much attention. Just in the international scene, it's kind of seen as panda habitat, but in reality, there's thousands of other species that are there, which is really neat. It's a biodiversity hotspot, and there's a lot of reasons for that. It's the topography is so unique in this region. It's very complex topography that's caused by it being kind of on a fault line of tectonic activity across. There's a lot of earthquakes in this region because there's just such huge variation in topography. There's the plateau area, and then there's really steep mountains. And so because of that, there's huge variation across the different elevations of different biodiversity that support it. So there's so many, like thousands of plant species. In this one nature reserve where I work, there's more butterfly species than some European countries have. So it's pretty incredible. The hope is that by conserving pandas that we're also helping all of these other species. But here's you just see some of the pictures of some of the mammals and birds. So there's a golden snub-nosed monkey is a really interesting one. You can see it jumping from a tree. These are beautiful monkeys. They're really rare. I mean, I think there's fewer numbers than giant pandas left, and they move through the trees in these social groups. So you can see them move through an area and they jump from tree to tree, and there's always an alpha male. So this monkey you see in the picture is an alpha male, and he's very like scary. Like he's small, but like I'm really scared. He has like this angry face and like this very loud sound, scaring. Like, so they don't feel comfortable around people. So they saw us there, and so the male is like making all these alarm calls, and but it's really fascinating to see their social groups go through this habitat. Really interesting species. And then there's red pandas, of course. So red pandas they're related to giant pandas. They also eat bamboo, although they have like a broader diet. They eat other things like berries and other kinds of plants and things like that, but mostly bamboo. They're really unique and beautiful species to see also. They love to climb trees, so usually that's where you find them. And they're very, it's hard to describe their energy, but like when you're hiking, sometimes we would be hiking and it's like that feeling when somebody's watching you. And I'm just like, I feel like I'm being watched. And you look up in the tree and there's this red panda like staring down into your soul. It's a really fascinating species. So that's also there. They're also, I believe, their current status is either vulnerable, threatened, or endangered. They have a broader range across a couple different countries, but their numbers are not that great. So there's also a lot of different deer species. Some of the deer are endangered as well in different parts of China. Really interesting deer species. And also birds. The birds are incredible also. There's a lot of pheasant birds that kind of run along the ground. This is a blood pheasant in the picture. There's another bird called a tragopan, which is like really bright feathers, very beautiful. So yeah, so it's a really amazing place to work. So one of the things that I did when I was a graduate student was I had to do this, I was in charge of this GPS collar study, and we caught wild pandas and put GPS collars on them. It was a very difficult project in a lot of ways. I'd be very hesitant myself in starting another GPS collar project at any point in the near future. Although I have great respect for people who do that, it's really hard. But there's some grad students in the department who do GPS collaring or radio collaring of different species. And I mean, I tip my hat to them because it's tough work. But the data is fascinating. Like there's a reason why people invest in it, because it's really fascinating, interesting data that you can get. So we only had permission from the Chinese government to collar 5 individuals, which is a really small sample size, but it's all we could get because the government really protects pandas and doesn't want too much research being done on them. So yeah, these are the pandas that we collared. And yeah, so we had 4 females and 1 male. And the male that we had is the one that says Chuan Chuan there in the middle. His ears, so you can tell he's a male, his ears are totally messed up. That's a sign that it's a male, because the males do fight for access to females during the mating season. And so they can do some serious damage to one another. And you can see the bite marks in their ears and stuff. So this is not a panda that's going to end up on the cover of National Geographic. This is a more real panda, but really fascinating, a really amazing species to follow around. So that's what we were doing. We were interested in following them because they hate people. They don't let you sit and observe them, because they smell you, they don't feel comfortable in a human presence. So if you really want to study their behavior, you have to do a method like this, where you're not there, you just color them, and then you can see the data later on about the location of where they've been across space at all these different time points. And so it was neat. It was like kind of getting this mysterious look into their more secretive lives that they lead. So this is kind of, I don't know if this is going to come through well in Zoom. Sometimes it doesn't come through, but I'll just press the button anyway. So you can kind of see the pandas going through their lives. So this whole period is like a 2-year period, so it's going through really fast. So each one of these is a different panda. So yeah, okay, just making sure nobody has questions. Yeah, so so a couple things to notice from this. This is like the data we're getting from their collars. So this yellow line that you see is a highway going through the reserve. So they're not that far from people, which is a surprising thing that people don't realize, that they're really like wandering around in the mountains, not that far from people's farmland, but they don't come out. So the farmers who live in this reserve, the vast majority have never seen a panda in their lifetime. And they live like literally right next to the forest. It's amazing to think about. That's just how secretive the species is and how much they don't like people. So, but they also don't disturb people. They don't bother people. They don't go in and eat people's livestock. They don't bother people's cropland for the most part. So in that sense, they're a really good species to live alongside if you want like kind of a more peaceful coexistence. So it's kind of neat, but they do overlap. The pandas overlap with each other. So you can see here in the GPS data a little bit, especially they have home ranges, and the home ranges are pretty small. It's only like 4 to 6 square kilometers, which is small for a large mammal. Like if you're comparing it to an American black bear or something, like that's tiny. And it's because they literally just sit down and eat bamboo all day. Like they don't have something that they're trying to hunt. They don't need to go like walking 2 kilometers to go try to find prey. They just sit down and eat bamboo. So then like 10 days later, they'll get up and move literally like 50 meters over and sit down and eat the bamboo in that other spot. And then like a week later, they'll move to like another spot. That's not that far away. So you can really see it in the data. You can see them doing that. They kind of just move around, and when they run out of bamboo in one spot, they just go to the next spot. And they kind of move like in circles, and they come back to the same spot like a year later, which is really interesting. So they do have a good spatial memory. They know their whole home range and where they are in space. They overlap with other pandas nearby. They don't like defend their home range against other individuals. There is overlap, but they don't socialize regularly with other pandas nearby. They kind of just keep track of each other from a distance. And I'll talk about that more in a slide coming up. But yeah, so they're really interesting species to study, I think. So yeah, this is just kind of another image of the type of data that you can get from these colors, and why it is worthwhile, even though it's kind of a difficult journey to get the data. It gives you like a 3D picture of how they're using space. So not only do you get a sense of like how big their home range is, but you get a sense of how much they're using each area within their home range. So which areas, like some of these you can see, like this one long, and this one pen. There's like one area within their home range that's like their favorite area, and they use that really intensively. And then there's other areas within their home range that kind of just use less so. So that makes it really interesting, because then you could study, okay, what is it about these certain locations that they like more than others? And then, you know, that could help you with potentially with conservation in the future of being like, okay, what types of areas do we really need to be conserving? So with pandas, I would say, I mean, definitely bamboo is like, you know, a basic requirement that they have. So that's the biggest thing that they need in their habitat. Also rivers, they need to drink water about every day. So they need to be close by to a river. There was a river running directly through our study area that they were using regularly. And what else would I say about, I mean, bamboo is the main thing. Sometimes you can find things about the forest. You can't have a forest that's too dense with too many trees, because the bamboo becomes really dry underneath because there's not enough sunlight to kind of come through, or there's too much sunlight. Kind of depends. You need like the exact amount of trees where it's not too few and not too many, so that the bamboo can be nutritious and grow well and not get too dense. So there's that factor also. But that's the main thing. I mean, some of the areas that are really steep, pandas tend to avoid just because it's really hard to move around up there. But yeah, other than that, I mean, basically, in some senses, they're a pretty simple species as far as you give them bamboo and they can really do a lot with that and be pretty happy. But yeah, really interesting species to study. Okay. So this is an interesting slide that became a whole theme in my dissertation that I was doing. So one day we went out in the field, we came up on this tree, and this is a den tree. So mother pandas will go and carve out trees to keep their babies inside, because their babies, when their babies are born, they're very small. They're like the size of a stick of butter, basically, like 3 to 5 ounces, and they have no hair. So they're like totally defenseless. We call them altricial young. So they are just totally dependent on their mother, and they can get very cold very easily. So they need to have a warm place. So the mothers will carve out these trees. This is a really famous den tree and a really good panda habitat. And I was really excited to go and see it because I had read about it. But when we went there during our research, I saw all of the species, like right here, you can see at the base of the tree. That's not panda feces, that's actually domestic horse feces. So we were really shocked to go there and see that this whole area around this tree, the bamboo had basically been mowed by these domestic horses that had been released by a farmer in the middle of the protected habitat where they were not supposed to be, and basically destroyed this whole area of habitat. I mean, because once you eat the bamboo, like that's the main thing that the pandas need. So if there's an animal going in and eating all of it, then that's just basically downgrades the habitat quality right there. So this really one image just sums up what I think is the biggest threat to giant pandas right now, which is livestock grazing, livestock all throughout their range. So it used to be that timber harvesting was the biggest threat because all of these forests were being cut down to make room for people. But now there are so many laws that prohibit people from going in and cutting down forest, which is a good thing for conservation. But people have to make a living. And so one of the other ways that they've done that is by livestock raising. And there've just been so many, like the number of livestock is increasing crazy throughout these protected areas. and people don't have anywhere to put the livestock. Like there's only a small number of pastures available. Like there's a moderate number of pastures, but the number of livestock is exceeding what the pastures can actually support. So people just put their livestock out in the forest. And, you know, as an ecologist, you could be thinking like there could be some real issues with that in a protected area, because the livestock are going in and they're trampling vegetation, they're compacting the soil gets all just, yeah, not healthy based on if there's too many livestock going through. And then obviously eating the bamboo is causing a major disturbance. So this is the biggest threat and thing that we're trying to contend with now, of how do you limit the number of livestock, and then how do you make up for that economic loss if you are limiting livestock? What are the people going to do to make a living? So it's a tricky, and I'm not saying that there's a simple solution. It's a tough one. So, but I think the biggest successes we've seen in panda habitat recently have been cases where you pay the farmers. You pay the farmers to help with conservation. You pay them to plant trees. You pay them to watch areas of forest and make sure people don't come in and disturb them. Those are really things that kind of have the potential to help pandas and people. And that's kind of, I think, where we need to be focused on in the future to really maintain the quality of habitat that we'd like to see in these protected areas. Tourism is another one that's been happening. Tourism is tricky because you could have really good ecotourism where people are really conscious and, you know, limiting their footprints and things like that. And then you could have just like mass tourism where the tourism actually causes a bigger damage than some of these other things that could be going on. So you got to be really careful with that one. And it's something that people are studying and we'll have to really keep an eye on going forward in the future. So that just gives you a sense of the complexity of some of these issues of managing people and pandas that we're dealing with. But yeah, there's the horses that we ran into later in the day. So one of the things that came out of this research was that in the protected area where we work, they banned horse rearing in the reserve after our data basically showed that it was really dangerous and kind of out of control. So that was a success for conservation in some senses. But then after that, they ended up just increasing their number of sheep and goats. So it's kind of an evolving issue that you have to keep kind of creatively responding to and figuring out. This is another interesting topic that has been a more recent topic that we've been studying. I have a colleague who has a student over there that's working on this project. It's really interesting, trying to better understand scent marking. So scent marking is the primary way that the species communicates. They have a gland underneath their tail, and it's like it secretes a sticky substance, and they rub it up against a tree. And there's been some studies, and each panda has its own unique chemical compound, and that a panda can come in, smell the scent, and know who that was. Know whether it's a male or female, know whether the animal's in estrus and ready to mate, know when the individual was there, know whether it's a dominant or a subordinate individual. So it's really a pretty advanced scent communication system. And so they have these trees all throughout the habitat that pandas regularly go back to certain trees. They really like coniferous trees because the bark will hold on to the scent longer. But also the location of the tree is important. Like if it's along a ridge line, that's kind of a route that a lot of pandas go by. Those trees are really popular by pandas for scent marking. And so this is kind of how they keep track of each other and how honestly they avoid each other because they don't want to be having conflicts all the time with each other. So this is kind of how they space themselves out. And yeah, I mean, it's a really complex system that we're still trying to understand. And I will say there was a recent panda reintroduction that they were trying to take a captive panda and reintroduce him to the wild. The first captive panda that they released was killed by the other pandas, primarily because it was a male and he wasn't picking up these cues. Like he didn't have the skills or the knowledge to interpret all of these marks. And so these other bigger male pandas were leaving him all these messages like, get out of here, like this is my home range, like you shouldn't be here. And he's just like was honestly totally oblivious because he was raised and born in captivity. So it just kind of highlights, you know, the complexity of some of these behaviors and that they're learned, and the importance of it, that they need these kind of behaviors to survive. And so you can see in the images, there's 4 different main postures that pandas do when they're scent marking. The one that you see all the way on the right, where the panda's high up on the tree, that's called the handstand posture. And that's the one that the males do. And mostly males, mostly females don't do that posture. And the males are doing it as kind of a competition. So if you're a bigger male, if you think about it, if you do that reverse handstand, your mark is going to be higher up on the tree. If you're a smaller male, it's going to be like lower. So it's this competition among the males of who can get the highest. And then if it's a dominant individual that's able to do that, then when the mating season comes along in the springtime, that individual is going to have better access to females to mate with, because it will have displayed its dominance. And then if there's any fighting, it's going to win, basically, if it's bigger and stronger. So it's just a really interesting system to try to study. And we put some cameras out to see like how frequently pandas are going to these sites and how frequently they're coming back to them to smell what other pandas have put. And so we really showed that during the mating season, especially, scent marking becomes really important for communication, more so than other times of year, although they're still doing it other times of year also. So they come back to the same sites more frequently during the mating season. And they come back to sites, very frequently, even like 10 days later, they'll come back and see, what other pandas have come by. And they have a strong memory going back to some of the same sites. So yeah, it was a really interesting kind of study to understand these different behaviors and how they're happening. So there's a lot more research that has to be done to understand the complexity of this system, because I think we're honestly just scratching the surface of what's happening. But yeah, this is just an example of some of the recent work. Oh, and so I just posted this. This is an ad for WWF, and just makes you think about, how we're deciding where to put our conservation money, and the role of charismatic species in conservation. I think it's a big debate, and I get a lot of flack because I study giant pandas, which are a charismatic species. And there are a lot of species that are not as quote unquote cute and don't get as much access to resources and funding. And so it is a big question to think about, is that right or is that wrong? Should we change that or not? I think it's definitely an interesting topic. And so this is so in my class in conservation biology, I had people come up with memes, conservation memes. And this is one that one of the students came up with in my class. And it's really cool. So it says, when you think you're a keystone species. And it's a joke that we had in our class, because the thing is that people who don't study pandas may not realize pandas are not a keystone species. As far as, keystone species is a species that's so important to its ecosystem, and if you remove it, the whole system basically collapses or completely changes because that species is gone. So an example could be an elephant or an apex predator that's controlling all of the different predators, mesopredators and prey below it. It's really central to the system. Whereas if you remove that one species, the whole thing changes. Pandas are really not that, to be totally honest with you. Ecologically, they're not a predator. They're not in this predator-prey dynamic. They eat bamboo, but bamboo grows back really quickly. This is a food resource that replenishes itself all the time. A bamboo, one stalk can grow 5 feet in 1 month. So, and the next year it just regenerates. So in that sense, pandas are not really driving a lot of the ecological dynamics in the system. So some people would argue, okay, so why are we putting all of the conservation money into this species? And that is a very interesting question. While they're not ecologically a keystone species, they're definitely a charismatic flagship species. They just really matter to the Chinese people and the Chinese government, and then also internationally as a conservation kind of icon. And so that's why I think more for a social and cultural reason, that's the main reason why they get so much attention and conservation focus on them. And so yeah, I mean, we hope that by conserving the species that, because they live in a biodiversity hotspot, there are other species that do benefit. However, there are species outside of their range in China that their habitat is not protected on the same level. More in the south of China, there's a lot of areas like forests that have been turned into things like palm oil. Areas where you used to see leopards and other big cats have really struggled and have not had it's not the same success story that we've seen with pandas. So, I mean, my hope with studying the species is that we'll be able to take some of the success we've had and translate it to other species in the future, and that maybe the Chinese government can start replicating this in other parts of their country for other different kinds of species. But yeah, it's a really interesting question to think about. So what I do now, since I've come to UF, I still do research on pandas. I don't get over to China as much as I used to, especially since COVID happened. But I have graduate students who are really fun and interesting people, and they study different species in all different parts of the world. So this is kind of a map of, these are some of my grad students. Rashid already graduated, and she's a faculty at Tuskegee, but she studied prairie dogs. So it was fun for me. It's definitely a lot of stuff I learned that I didn't know before. She taught me a lot about that species. So that was really fun. And then I have Christian, who studies wildlife markets, which is a really interesting study from Peru. This is Manuel. He did an MDP or a master's program with me. He worked on jaguar issues in Ecuador, and now he's a PhD student in Nia Morales' lab. And then this is Vivi. She's a student now, and she works in Paraguay. That's where she's from. And she works in this system called the Chacos, which is like this forest that's disappearing at a really alarming rate. And it has a lot of really unique species like peccaries and a giant anteater. So that's a really interesting thing. And then I had the student Marcial, who studies lions in West Africa. And then I had a student, Ichao, he graduated and is now a PhD student in Arizona, but was working on pandas with me. And then I have a student, Xiaoxing, who works on snow leopards. So it's also in China, but it's kind of another, it overlaps, snow leopards overlap a little bit with pandas, but they're at higher elevations, kind of above the tree line. So that's been a different experience also to learn about. So yeah, I've kind of like learned and lived vicariously through my grad students, and also through the undergrads that take my classes and study really, are interested in a lot of different topics. So I do have a project coming up that's kind of gotten a little bit sidelined by COVID, but I am going to take undergrads over to China, a small group of undergrads, to go to panda habitat and wander around in the mountains, and it could be really interesting. I'm hoping I'm hoping it'll be fun, not too wild, but yeah, so I'm excited about it. So we were supposed to be taking students over next summer. But it's really hard to get in China right now with COVID. So it's going to be actually summer 2023. So if anyone is still an undergrad in summer 2023 and is interested in maybe joining us, be on the lookout. But there's also another one of these programs that Rob Fletcher in our department at UF is doing this summer coming up in Africa. So I don't know if you've heard about that yet. He's going to be coming around to all of the classes and talking about his program. It's, I believe, in South Africa. And yeah, it's a summer research experience over there. So yeah, I believe the flyer is really going to be circulating around, but if not, I don't have the flyer yet, but whenever I get it from him, I could circulate it to your group. To check it out if you're interested. But yeah, just encourage all of your students to, like, whatever you're interested in, just go for it and explore the world, because there are a lot of really cool stuff out there. So I think that's all I had, but I'm happy to take any. Question about, do I know the dates of the Africa trip? I do not, but I believe the later this week or next week, Rob is going to be sending out the flyer. And like they have a website that they're going to be putting up that I don't think is ready yet, but he just gave a talk today. Okay, good to know. I was wondering. Summer A, yeah, I can see if I can get the flyer from him. I can send it to your group so you can circulate it in your club. Yeah, cool. Sure, no problem. Nice. All right. Does anyone have any other questions?
I had a question.
Sure.
So when you went to like the home range, like the little video that you showed, there seemed to be like one that had a larger home range than like all the others. Was there like a specific reason for this that you know of?
Yes, that's very observant. Yeah, that's the male. So the one male in our group. So unfortunately, we have a small sample size, and so there's only one male. So it's then hard to generalize anything from it. It becomes like a study on these 5 individuals. But yeah, I mean, what we know from reading the previous literature on some radio collar studies that were done in the 1980s, they also found that males tend to have slightly larger home ranges. The reason is that males, what they do is they kind of like circulate around and they try to keep track of the different females. So they'll kind of, yeah, so they have certain females they want to keep an eye on for when the mating season comes. They want to increase their chances of being able to mate with that individual. So they have like these periods, they'll go on these long journeys to like the other side of their home range to kind of smell like where everyone is and what they're doing. In contrast, the females don't really need to keep track of anybody. I mean, they keep track of each other, so they're not on top of each other all the time, but they don't have the same need to monitor to that extent what everyone's doing at all times. So they tend to kind of sit more and especially if they have a baby, they tend to be really localized because the babies require so much of their time. So a mother panda will spend 2 years of her life with a young, um, teaching it everything, and so they tend to really become stationary in that instance too. Good question.
Thank you.
Sure.
I have a couple questions.
Sure.
For your grad student that's studying snow leopards, you said that their habitat range overlaps with pandas slightly. Have you seen or like have heard of from like locals if there's any interactions between snow leopards and pandas?
That's a really good question. So snow leopards, I would say, as far as I know, no, just because the snow leopards really, they love these snow-capped mountains. Like they live in these areas that have no forest, which is just, it blows my mind, honestly, that they could survive in that really
Yeah.
extreme environment. Like it's really harsh. So yeah, my grad student Xiaoxing, it's like her study area is so much harsher than mine. It's just like she's living in this tent and she's got like 5 layers of all these clothes, like just trying to stay warm. It's a really harsh environment to be in. So it's amazing that they can somehow survive and find prey there. Pandas tend to be, I would say, 3,600 meters or lower in elevation, whereas snow leopards are more like 4,000, 5,000 meter elevation, at least in this area where I work. So they don't overlap in that sense, elevation wise, because pandas, once they get out of bamboo, they can't survive longer than like a day or two. So but that's a good question because there are these other leopard cats, and I do not have a picture offhand of a leopard cat, but it's like a small, it's like a house cat, but like it's like a mix between a house cat and then like a leopard combined. It's a really interesting species, and they're smaller, but you can find them all throughout panda habitat in the same elevational range. Um, and there used to be even leopards, like big leopards throughout this area too. And that was the biggest, they always say, okay, giant pandas have no natural predators. However, the leopards can go and eat a baby panda because, you would think they're huge. So that used to be a thing. They think in the 1970s and before, leopards have basically been extirpated from this area. So leopards were overhunted essentially. So there's no leopards anywhere that I know of in panda habitat now, which is sad because they should be there. There should be more predators there ecologically that are not because they've been overhunted. And so yeah, there's not really a predator for the baby pandas anymore. I think a leopard cat is a little too small, I would think. That's a good question. If a leopard cat could take down a baby panda, I don't know. That's an interesting question. It definitely could not take on a mother panda for sure.
Yeah.
Like,
And
but
then
interesting.
I was
Yeah.
really,
Good
I was
question.
really interested in when you mentioned that the captive panda that got released was killed.
Mhm.
Don't know how to like recognize the scents. How do they
Mhm.
behavior? Like, do males stay with their moms longer than females so that they can learn how to recognize those scents? Like, how is it
Yeah.
actual? Like to know?
Yeah. That's a great question. I mean, so yeah, I mean, I think so the babies, all of the babies stay with the moms for 2 years, which is kind of a long time. For
Mhm.
some species, it's not that long. It might be a year, even less. For pandas, it's 2 whole years, sometimes even 2.5 years. So it's just thinking about every day, the time that the mother is spending with the young, and then all of the opportunities it has for learning, and all the things it could be picking up, like which kinds of bamboo to eat, how to interpret these different scent marks. they might even like meet other male pandas or female pandas and like see them fighting and try to understand, okay, how does fighting work? And like, if I encounter a big panda, what do I do? Like I go climb a tree, like these things. Yeah, and it's hard to replicate that. How do you replicate that in captivity? It's almost impossible. So what they've done since that first failure of reintroduction is that they now take a female that was rescued from the wild. So a female that was born in the wild and used to live her whole life in the wild before she was rescued because she was sick, and now she's in captivity. They take her and they put her in a very natural environment that's enclosed but has bamboo and has all these things. She's pregnant, and then when she has the baby, it's like the people try not to go in and intervene. They try to make it the most natural setting as possible so that this female has all of this knowledge, and you hope is somehow able to teach the baby, even though it's slightly artificial environment. And they've also been reintroducing mostly females because it's like a lower risk of something like that happening. And they've also chosen areas that there's not as many pandas in them already. That's key because a lot of the areas of habitat, like they're great habitat for a reason, and there's more pandas there for a reason. And you can't just introduce other pandas on top of that. You have to find habitat where there's fewer pandas for whatever reason. So it's really tricky. The reintroduction program is hard, but I think it's gotten better though. Good question.
And then one more, and I'll
Sure.
leave the floor for someone else. What do you recommend someone do in undergrad to prepare for grad school? Like doing undergrad research in a lab or doing like some type of volunteering? Like what do you recommend you allocate?
Yeah, that's a great question. The number one thing I would recommend is any kind of research experience at all is good. So when I was an undergrad, I did 2 different research projects. So the first one I did, it was in a lab where it was a guy studying birds, and it was literally like PCR on like bird blood samples, and they were trying to identify whether the samples were male or female based on this DNA process. So in other words, it was something I never wanted to do in my life. It was like really fascinating, but I was like, this is not going to be my career. Like I knew it was not going to, like, I wanted to learn about it, and I wanted to appreciate the difficulty of people who do that, like what they go through in the lab and how hard it is, and like, wow, I could never do this. Like that's what it was like for me. But it was really worthwhile because now I do have that appreciation for people who do that and what their process is like and some of the challenges that they have. And it's a research experience, so it was a stepping stone. So the person I worked for, wrote a recommendation letter for me for grad school and things that came after that, and I had a really good relationship with him. So yeah, and it just taught me about the scientific process, like how do you go about having a hypothesis and then collecting data and then writing things up and things like that. So it was awesome. So I definitely encourage undergrads, even if whatever the opportunity is, even if it's something you don't want to end up doing, it's going to be worthwhile at the stage that you're at. And then the second one I did was on primates. I was studying, it was over the summer, and I was studying primate behavior. So it was interesting. And so I picked a topic on scent marking because I wanted to do research on scent marking in pandas in the future. And I didn't have opportunity to do research on pandas as an undergrad, obviously. So I was just like, oh, I'll just pick a topic that's related. So I learned a lot about scent marking, and a lot of it is relevant. And even though it's a different species, so there again, I mean, it was something really valuable, even though it wasn't like leading to necessarily where I was going after. So research experience, I think, is the number one. And yeah, and multiple different ones. Like if you do one and it's for a semester, like pick up a totally different topic again in the future or something like that in another semester. The second, I did study abroad. I did 2 study abroad programs, one in Kenya and one in China. Those were awesome. I love those. Those are harder. I think financially they're harder to swing. So not everyone can figure that out, especially if your schedule, if you have to take all these classes and things like that. But if you can, it's an awesome thing to do because it, again, opens you up to the possibilities of what's out there and gives you other unique research experience and things like that. That's another thing I would recommend. What else would I recommend? Yeah, I mean, those are the 2 main things I would say. And I think the key thing is realizing that grad school in our field, they pay you. So like you get paid to go to grad school, and then they pay for your tuition and they pay you a salary. So not everyone realizes that when they're like freshman, sophomore, and things like that. Like it's daunting to think about paying for more schooling. So obviously it is. So just realizing that if you choose to do a master's in wildlife, it will be paid for. So most cases, like vast majority, I would say. I mean, depending, but I hope I'm not like overgeneralizing that, but so it's, yeah, keeping that in mind is an option. And the first, like the summer before your senior year and maybe the first semester of senior year, if you want to go directly into a master's, to really just go crazy contacting people and doing searches for people looking for master's students, just spend tons of time on that until you can hit on somebody who has funding and is trying to hire a master's student and you can get into that lab. I think is really important. It's also fine to take time off, like take a couple years and just do different seasonal jobs in different parts of the country or the world and different species, just to kind of learn what you like or what you don't like, and just get research experience that way. I know people have done that and really like doing that, like taking a break before going to the master's program. So that can be valuable too. But yeah, I mean, I think those are the main things. And then like just pursuing your passion and showing people that you're passionate about it. When you contact them, like if you contact an advisor or someone and like, oh, you know, are you looking for graduate students, and showing them that you're really passionate about what they do, I think is a suggestion I have.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Sure.
Any other questions? Any questions in person? Feel free to raise your hand.
Wow.
Okay. Let's bring the mic over.
We have an in-person
So for the pandas that are in captivity, have we attempted at all to try and feed them food besides bamboo to probably give them more nutrients than the bamboo provides to them?
Yeah, that's a great question. There are people who do research on that in captive environments. There's been some really interesting studies on diet and nutrients and things like that. They make some of these zoos, they make these bamboo cakes that's like high packed full of nutrients and protein, all these things. And so I would watch them. It's like this little factory where they put a whole bunch of bamboo in there and it's mixed together with like milk and some other things, and then it makes this like cake. So it's interesting. Yeah, I mean, people have been really experimenting with that in captivity. And yeah, so I think the big challenge in captivity is it takes a lot of bamboo to support them. They eat so much, like in some times of year, they could eat like 30 pounds of bamboo or 35 pounds of bamboo a day. And so as a zoo, you have to have access to like a huge area that's going to keep growing bamboo for you if you're going to be able to support the diet of that individual. And so that's something, yeah, that I've seen being kind of a stumbling block in some captive environments. I will say in the wild, that's interesting. There've been some studies on nutrients and diet and things like that. I think it's surprising how much pandas can get out of bamboo. They switch different species, different times of year. So sometimes of year they eat the leaves, other times of year they eat the stems, and then other times they eat shoots that are just coming up in the spring. And then they switch different species at different seasons also. So there's this one species that's really nutritious in spring, and then that's the season that they'll eat that, and then they'll switch to a different species. So switching among species and among different bamboo parts has been the way that they've been able to make sure they get enough nutrients. And so it's really interesting to kind of, they've started to study that. And it really highlights the importance of conservation, because just going to an area and being like, oh, there's one bamboo species here, that'll be plenty for them. It might not necessarily be true, because we may really need to be thinking about conserving areas that have multiple bamboo species. And if we really want to be making sure that we're meeting the nutritional needs. So yeah, that's definitely a key point. But one of the most interesting studies recently is studying the panda gut, like inside their stomach, and the microbiome of all of the microbes in the stomach. And they've found that there's some special microbes that you don't find in other species. Microbes that help break down not cellulose, but hemicellulose. So, and you don't see these in other, like in carnivores or other species. So they've adapted some special microbes that really help them at least somewhat in the digestive process, even though they still have these short digestive systems that are really not made to process this amount of plant material in bulk. So, but yeah, it's really fascinating. Great question.
Cool, thank you. One more question on that. So when they were making the cakes with the bamboo and the milk, were they able to process the milk as adults? Because I know in humans, for people like me that are lactose intolerant, you lose that enzyme. So did they retain that enzyme?
That is a great question. I actually don't know the answer to that. I'm really curious about that though, about like if there's a lactose intolerance or, because I know they definitely feed it to the babies. And do they stop at one point and then not do that anymore for the adults? That's a really good, I'll have to ask like my panda keeper friends that question. Yeah, that's a great question.
Well, thank you.
Cool. Any other questions online? Wow, thank you very much, Dr. Hall. Let's give a round of applause for her.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always
Yeah.
great to come. I hope next time I'll be able to come in person. So
Yeah. Also, just so everyone knows, she is our club advisor. I don't think I said this earlier, but yeah, she's amazing.
cool.
Thanks, Jen.
Nice.
Yeah, have a good night, everyone. Feel free to
Great.
hang around if you do have any questions, but yeah.
Yeah, and feel free to send me an email too. My email is on the WEC website. So yeah, anytime, shoot me an email.
Yeah. Thanks for coming, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Mhm.